Well, it's great that I can present my paper here. It's nice that everybody's shown up. Not a lot of people, but I get the feeling it's the last day of the conference, so everybody's kind of, and as mentioned, some people probably decide to stay home because it's Saturday. Yeah, my name is Micah, and last name is actually a lot easier to say than it looks. It's Hrehovcsik. I come from a pretty diverse background, actually, in terms of why I'm here. One part of it is because I'm a game designer. I was trained as a game designer in the Netherlands in one of the first courses on game design and development. From that game design and development course, I was taken on as a game design researcher. So this is quite a bit different from game study researcher because we're really interested in game design. But furthermore, part of my role is a game design lecturer. So I actually teach game design. And that's actually what my paper is about. So one of the things I ask my students each year when they begin is just, why is there a game design course? Why are they sitting here today? Because it's definitely not because of board games, unfortunately. Because, and I point out that because of the computer, we've actually had the chance to explore new paradigms with games. And, but what I tell them also is that games have existed long before there was a computer. And my course, what I teach them, is getting down to that basic essence of what a game is and getting rid of the technology aspect of that game. So what does our education look like at the HKU? First off, a good part of their education is project-based learning. So all the students work in projects together on games. These games typically are client-based. So when they get together, they're actually working for a real-world client. These teams are also multidisciplinary. So they're working with, the game designers are working with game artists, game programmers, they're working with sound designers, they're working with researchers, etc., etc. The teams that are formed, these projects are semi-independent. We give them a lot of autonomy, actually. That means that they can run off, they can form their team how they see it, they give themselves team names. They can basically do everything they want. And our job as educators is to kind of more or less make sure that they stay on course, not get into too much trouble, and if there are any kind of legal issues or something, that's the school's issues, not the students' issues. Now, last one is that almost everybody that's a teacher within this school has some form of industry experience. So we're all coming from the industry. However, what I find is as I'm teaching game designers and young game designers, we all have one thing in common. We're all entertainers, actually. We want to entertain our target audience. And they want their players to be engaged with the games that they make. And this kind of brings about a problem, because when we start to talk about applied games, and I use applied games in placement of serious games, because as mentioned by Professor Mayer yesterday, I come from the Netherlands, and applied games is the term that we typically use there. Now, if I ask my students, how many of you want to get into applied game design? How many of you want to be there? Well, less than 1% will raise their hands, and I have about 90 first-year students, and that means maybe one student out of that entire class is going to raise their hand and say, oh, I want to do something with applied games. It's just not sexy. They don't see it as a form of a way to, they don't see it as a form in which they can entertain people or engage people. And there's a lot of negativity towards the serious games. And there's a lot of bad serious games out there that has managed to turn away good game designers. So this is a little bit, this is more than a little bit of a joke actually for my students, because 50% of the Dutch game industry makes applied games. So if they're going to later on try to go out and find a job or even start a company themselves, they're going to find themselves faced with making applied games, most likely. So very few of them actually run off and will get into the entertainment industry, because even the companies companies and so forth, the students that get into companies that start entertainment, want to do entertainment gaming, often start with applied games because that's where they can make money to support their efforts to make their entertainment games. So this problem is that I have a lot of talented game designers coming out of my school, and they want to go into game design, and they think only in terms of entertainment games. Now the problem is that by this, it often leaves the hands of the game design then in applied games in the hands of enthusiasts, researchers, academics, doctors, teachers that have not had 4 years to experiment and to take a look at game design as game design. And on top of it, many entertainment game designers that go into applied games have their own pitfalls. One of those is the cut and paste of entertainment game genre paradigms to applied game design. So people think, well, there's only one type of fun, so I make a platformer because everybody recognizes that as fun. So they try to use these paradigms as a solution to the applied game, but that's not necessarily what you need to do. You can actually be, if you have a good bag of tricks as a game designer, you can dig much deeper in and find different ways of entertaining people than just the typical entertainment game paradigms. So this leaves me with a little bit of a problem, because what kind of theory can I give to my students to support them in their interest of applied games, but also into how to do applied game design, and what is it? Now, the problem is if we look at a lot of academic literature on serious games and applied games, you end up with a load of books like this. It comes from academia, and as a game designer, it's kind of, well, impossible to just go through in one go. It really takes a lot of effort, and as a researcher, I've gone through all these books, and it's my attempt to make it more accessible to my students, so that they can get into what's really important into an applied game design project, and that is designing the game. So my theory is if I can make good game designers, then I can make better applied games down the road. And good game designers should be able to design all kinds of games, is what was told from Chris Bateman. And I believe that wholeheartedly, that you cannot train game designers to be only in health. You can't train game designers to only be in safety. You have to have game designers that can actually operate in every domain. So when we look at taxonomies and so forth, those taxonomies are totally useless to game designers because they don't tell you anything about the paradigms that are used in the design of the game. They just tell what is the purpose. And that's interesting for everybody outside of game design, but not for the game designers themselves. So here's what a basic look at my course looks like. I have some basic things I provide to my students. First, a philosophical goal of what would be the ideal applied game. Then a look at tactical forms. And you might want to actually think of it in terms of something like a bit of a taxonomy, a new form of a taxonomy, but more from a game design perspective. And then lastly, an actual tool to do research with and select good concepts that are going to work the best for that particular applied game. So the first one, the philosophy. We base our philosophy at the HKU and our applied games on something that we dug up from the past. It's from Vitruvius. He was a Roman architect. And he had three concepts for his architecture, and this is pervasive throughout all of Roman architecture, and that's Fermentus, Venustus, and Utilitas. And this comes back in everything that the Romans did. So this is an aqueduct, a Roman aqueduct, and if you take a good look at it, yeah.
Near where I live.
Oh, well. So, and then, as you know, then people come and actually look at this, right? There's tourists that come and want to look at the aqueduct. Well, if we look at our modern day aqueducts, they don't necessarily blend in very well with the environment. No tourists are going to come here and take a look at this. And it probably won't be around in the next 100 years if you were to leave it unmaintained. So what we've done is we've adapted this idea, or I've adapted this idea for my students actually into games. So we're not architects, of course, but we're game designers. So Venustus for us is, what is the gameplay experience? What kind of meaningful gameplay experience can you give to a player? Utilitas, for us, means that the game has to reach its goals. It has to be a good game, as the term here. And finally, firmitas, well, in architecture means that architecture is built to last forever. But firmitas in applied games is the idea of how does the game fit within a certain context? Because there's many, many good applied games out there that don't see the light of day because they miss one little element that doesn't fit. So I make a game, it's meant for the classroom. Oh, not every student has a computer. Then the game is not used, and it can't be used. Or it takes too long to run in a classroom. So there's many frailties of an applied game just from the firmistas idea. So that's the philosophy. Going very quickly, and if you want more details, of course, you can always go and look more into the paper, which is still small, but you can always contact me if you want to know more. But going on to the tactical form. So the idea of how do we use applied games? Well, this is about 98%, maybe 95% of applied games. And it's kind of funny because it actually kind of, even though we talk about pull and push models of media, in a kind of way, the applied game at the moment is primarily used to push a message upon the players, even though the game itself is very motivating. And we expect the game to take up a lot of the weight and a lot of the work of teaching and so forth. So we see many games that follow this paradigm. And you can think of things like any game that's used for training and education and so forth. This is more along the line of the games that are aggregating information, taking information from the player. So the tactical form here is that the commissioner of the game wants information that only the players can provide. So games like Fold It is a great example of this. There's another paradigm that's going to be coming up very soon. And this is something that actually in our research department, we've already created 2 games on. And I mentioned them actually in the paper that I've written. And this tactical form is a tactical form where it's both push and pull. So what happens is we have a certain goal that we want to achieve with the game player, but based on the information provided by the game player, we can change the game. And we have a person in the back end that is actively working with the player. So you could almost think of it as in terms of a game master, or even a player with the players. And this doesn't only just change the relationship of how the game is used with the player, but it also changes the relationship if it's doctor-patient. Because now they're on the same level. It's not just the doctor giving a game and hoping that the game works, but now the doctor is actually participating somehow in the game and can actually communicate through the game to the patient. And this is a paradigm I think that will eventually come up, because I think many applied games actually already use people like teachers and doctors to employ the game, to be there in the context of the game. But I have a feeling that you can't get rid of them entirely, so you need them to be quite active in the role of the game. Something that's actually not my paper, and I excluded it for 2 reasons. One, I didn't have enough space for writing the paper, but 2, because it's also one of the more difficult games to explain the value of. This game is actually, people build games together to communicate and learn from each other. This is also seen like in many workshop formats and so forth, where a game is used actually for policy making. So by playing the game, you can also communicate with each other better and come up with better plans. So the third basic element that I give to my students is this,
On the previous slide,
yeah.
You had a cross. What does that mean?
Oh, it's not in my paper. It's not in my paper at the moment that I wrote. So I left it out at the moment because sometimes I feel it's quite confusing for people, and then I have the limited space in my writing, so I left it out. So, sorry about that. So the third element of what I educate my students with is how do we get to a good applied game? How do we do it? How do we do the research? Now we can go out there and we can do tons of literature research, we can do tons of ethnographic kind of research and so forth, but actually game designers are not so handy at that. They're not necessarily researchers. They want to get down to making the game. They want to do their job, which is designing the game, not doing the research, not going into depth into these things. So what I've come up with is a very, very simple tool for my students, and it's based on very simple questions. What, how, who, where, when, why. And it sets up the idea that on one side, of course, you have a commissioner, someone that has a goal for the game, as a player, somebody that will eventually play the game, and you have a game as the facilitator. Now, what I've done is I've taken these questions and I've made them, of course, a little bit better understandable for my students. So my students also receive these kind of papers, in which guide papers, you could say, in which to guide them through asking the questions for their research. Now, what's interesting is if they can't answer any of these questions of how, why, where, that's the moment where they can run off and start doing research. If they can't get those questions from their client, that's a moment that they can either stop the project and say, well, we can't continue unless you actually figure out what these parameters are, because I cannot design the game. And because we're only building up parameters, it allows actually the game designers to actually have a lot of room to come up with new concepts. So I'll just go quick and explain what do I mean by context. So the who would be the target audience. The where is talking about location that a game could potentially be played in. And the when is talking about the amount of time you expect from your player that is going to play the game. Many game designers make the pitfall, for instance, of thinking that, oh, okay, I'm going to come in, make an applied game, and I have to make it a 40-hour-long game because that's what entertainment games do. Well, I know for certain that some of the best applied games are only about 15 minutes long. And you can make them short and powerful. Content, very easy to understand, is the main purpose of the game. And usually that's laid down by the client. Transfer is the idea of two sides. We have two sides of the game. On one side, why is the player going to play it? What kind of playful verbs can we use that's going to trigger interesting gameplay experience for the players? And then on the other side is the transfer. What is the method in which the game actually works? What are the actual learning steps? So if we're talking about education, for instance, it's understanding that they need to learn particular content, they have to be able to have these skills and so forth. But within a classroom, this is how it's usually achieved. And these are helpful tools to understand when you can compare them to the actual playful verbs, whether you're going to achieve that or not. Now, once you build this whole, maybe it's best to look at it as a scope model, and I just term it as the scope model. Once you build a scope model of what it is, you have guidelines, and it goes through a process. And what I try to do with my students is to have them step away so that they can generate a lot of different ideas, because I believe strongly in the idea that it's better for them to be building quantity over quality ideas. Many of my students will sit for hours long and only come up with 3 ideas in the beginning. But once I give them this model and this method, I can loosen them up. There's no more competition for them to say, I have the best idea. It becomes a process. It becomes a way of finding the right idea for the project. So it becomes the quantity over the quality. And it becomes a funnel for the right idea to come out of that process. But more importantly, the scope model and so forth is only a compass to achieving the right kind of applied game that you want to achieve. And that's my talk. And yeah, I hope that was interesting. And yeah, if you have any questions and so forth, you can contact me, and I guess you can ask now.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hrehovcsik. I am sorry about my mistake. And as your presentation was very interesting, I myself forget to make it ask for making it shorter. So I guess many of you may have comments or questions, but as we are run out of time, so please ask him.